I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. But I do love me some J.R.R. Tolkien, so let's talk about that. Among the tales of sorrow and of ruin that came down to us from the darkness of those days, there are yet some in which amid weeping there is joy. And under the shadow of death, light that endures. It is not despair, for despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt. We do not, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. The wise speak only of what they know. Yet faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens. Where there is life, there is hope. And may it be a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out. For the road goes ever on, and not all those who wander are lost. Many are the strange chances of the world, and help oft come from the hands of the weak when the wise falter. War must be, while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour us all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend. The world is full enough of hurts and mischances without wars to multiply them. It is the way of my people to use light words at such times and say less than they mean. We fear to say too much. It robs us of the right words when a jest is out of place. And so do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. I will not say, do not weep, for not all tears are an evil. All have their worth, and each contributes to the worth of the others. But in this hour, I do not believe that any darkness will endure. In the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. Hey, what's up, bookworms and hobbits and men and elves and dwarves and all those fine little creatures of our Middle Earth, guys? We are here today to talk some Tolkien on the channel. Finally, something I put off for a long time, but the time has come to talk about John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. Born in 1892, a war veteran, a teacher, a writer, and a poet. Someone I feel like is more affectionately known, obviously, as J.R.R. And he's really most well known, guys, for writing the most popular fantasy series of all time. So unless you live in a hole in the ground, you've heard at least of J.R.R. Tolkien. That's probably why you clicked the thumbnail there and came into this video to hear me talk about him. Now, the thing that I think gets a little misconstrued is, no, Tolkien was not the first person ever to write fantasy. He didn't create this genre, as some people like to believe that he did. However, I think that what he did is he was very much responsible for its resurgence in the 20th century and pretty much gave it staying power to where it wasn't just like a fly-by-night thing and then it was kind of over. Hey, remember 20 years ago when we liked Ice Ice Baby kind of thing? It wasn't like that. It was a thing that said, okay, this is a genre that needs to be taken seriously and it is here to stay. And he set the bar so high that people are still trying to copy it today. So I don't think that I really needed to do a why you should read about J.R.R. Tolkien. I feel like if you like fantasy, it's something that you should have already done or at least had an interest to do. But you'd be surprised how many people are like, yeah, I love fantasy, but I still haven't ever read Lord of the Rings. I've seen the movies, and I still haven't ever read it. So, guys, I'm here to talk about why you should read J.R.R. Tolkien. So let's kick right into it here. I think the best reason, guys, is if you are a first-time fantasy reader, this is the perfect place for you to start. Now, I think you should start at The Hobbit. Now, The Hobbit, obviously, that's the book that I cut my fantasy teeth on. This was the very first fantasy book that I read. I like to say it's the first book I read without pictures in it, but I think that was actually Treasure Island. I don't know. My Treasure Island might have actually been a little illustrative. I did read Treasure Island before this one, but this was like the first like real adultish book, even though it is a children's book, but you know what I mean. It was the first one that didn't feel like it was Berenstain Bears or something, or Berenstain Bears, depending on which Earth you're from. Anyhow, so yeah, I think that any age, any gender, anyone can appreciate this book. It's great for kids, but it has so much charm for adults as well, and I think it holds up. I read it again about this time last year, and I was surprised. I mean, I'm not really surprised because, guys, before I started this channel, I used to reread Lord of the Rings about every 2 years. All right, so I haven't read it since 2019, I think, is when I reread the trilogy, and I reread The Hobbit early last year just because it was like, hey, I got some time. Why not? I haven't read it in a while, and I got that annotated edition, and I wanted to reread it. But I think, unlike Lord of the Rings, that one's kind of approachable for everyone because he did write it with younger readers in mind. So it's easy to follow. You're never going to be kind of bogged down with too much world building or too many characters or anything like that. I mean, I think there's a lot of characters, but it's never hard to follow. I think it's easy for anyone to follow. So I think it really much, like I said in that video where I talked about fantasy series, I think that you could start with if you've never read fantasy before. I definitely think The Hobbit is a great place to start. I don't think that a lot of new fantasy readers come into it like a lot of fantasy snobs these days. I think that everything's got to have like, a 48 level character tier or like the world building's got to just be like just ridiculous. I don't think you have to have that with The Hobbit. Now you can get that in this series. Obviously, we're going to talk about, but with The Hobbit, I don't think so. What made that so special, The Hobbit, was the world that he created. Everything was so vivid and magical, and it just exploded people's imaginations at this age. The time period that this came out, in the 30s. People had never read anything like this before. I argue that Conan was there, but I feel like Conan is something that got a little more popular, years later. It wasn't really as popular, obviously, when Mr. Howard was with us. But, same with Lord of the Rings, it really, he was still alive, but it was like it came out in the 50s, but it didn't really blow up until the 60s. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. As far as the Hobbit, I think it just, like I said, it just captured people's imagination because they weren't used to a world being described like this. Now, when you move along to the Big Daddy, The Lord of the Rings, the thing that's funny about this is it actually did start as a children's book. It was just going to be a straight sequel to The Hobbit. It was going to be another children's book. Over the course of the 17 years that it took him to write this, because it started to get away from him a little bit, but he was also teaching at the same time, guys. I don't want people thinking, okay, yeah, he was spending time creating languages and stuff like that, but it was kind of a part-time thing. He was a teacher full-time, so this was his side gig, so he never really actually planned to be a writer. Actually, it's funny about that is him translating Beowulf was actually like where he was like, oh, I might have a career in this. Kind of funny to go back and think about. I talked about Beowulf on the channel recently with my guy Philip, and who knows, maybe Philip and I will get together and talk about some of these Lord of the Rings books. I don't know. I haven't even talked to him about that yet. But with this, guys, it actually started as a children's book, and then over time, it just kind of started evolving, and he just kept building more and more into that world, and it evolved into the story that we know and love today. So while I say I think anyone could start with The Hobbit, I mean, I guess you could start here. Just kind of depends on your reading level, but it's not going to be as easy as The Hobbit. And then you come into that thing with like people are like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to read some of the prose of Mr. Tolkien. His prose is going to not be for everyone. It's going to be a little jarring. It does feel of the time. It's one of the things I said about Edgar Rice Burroughs is I didn't feel like his writing felt like of the time, whereas like a Lovecraft, a Howard, and a Tolkien do kind of feel like of their time in their writing style. So you will have that, and it's a little tough for some people to get into in Lord of the Rings because it is a little rougher than it is to get into The Hobbit, I think, for a first-time fantasy reader. But if you are a well-versed fantasy reader, you've read tons of modern fantasy, you've read tons of classic fantasy, you just never really went back this far, I don't think you'll have any problem starting with Lord of the Rings if you want to. But how did this become the most beloved and famous fantasy series of all time? I think it's just because he took that foundation that he built with The Hobbit, and then he just kind of just blew it up from there. It's like, okay, I got this idea for this world, but I'm just going to keep on building onto this lore and this mythology and just keep building it up higher and higher and higher. And the thing is, guys, this is still like a great story. I know a lot of people always talk about like, well, this world was just like so immersive and like it's just so incredible. No one ever could touch the world the same way that he did. But the thing is, like, the story is still great. The story is magnificent. The journey is incredible, right? It's one of those things where I feel like he didn't bog you down with world building like you would think with a series that gets this much of a reputation about its world. I don't think that he really did. I think he gave you enough to understand what was going on, to understand like the hierarchy and things like that, of who was who, what was what land was doing what. But then he kind of left it open for your interpretation on some things, and then he built on that in the appendices. And if you don't know, the appendices are all basically a novella at the end of Lord of the Rings, which is just like the history of a lot of this stuff. And then posthumously, his son Christopher actually finished the Silmarillion, and that basically became like the history of Middle-earth. So he created this entire history of this world that if you really got into it, you could go back and really, really dive deep into it. It's rather impressive when you think about how much he did in such a little time. And I know that people always be like, well, I don't know, little time, 17 years to write Lord of the Rings. How long do you think it would have took you, while you were working full-time at that, So I'm never going to kind of look at it like that. And obviously the research tools that we have now are a little different than they were then and stuff. So, I don't see that as a knock against them. But what's made this kind of endure is I feel like this lore and this mythology are second to none. It's something that is still being emulated and somewhat copied to this day, and no one's ever able to quite get it there. I feel like some people that try, they feel like they're trying too hard or something. But, you just got to think, hey, this is what they grew up reading. They were inspired by it. They want to make their own living, breathing world like this. And I can't knock them for trying to do that. But it's either like it just feels like a straight copy, or it's like, oh, yeah, like in Lord of the Rings, So I'm not saying that no one has had a good world like his since. There's probably tons I haven't even tried to read myself yet. But for me, this will always be the gold standard when it comes to world building and mythology and lore and the history of a universe. I mean, this is just so deep. It's amazing. I haven't even read it all yet. So there's so much more to discover outside of just The Hobbit and outside of Fellowship and Towers and Return of the King, if you really want to dive into it. And I think that's what makes his universe just like the most impressive of any other author to ever try to do this. But guys, with me, all things with Tolkien come down to the journey. And I'm not just talking about the journey to Erebor. I'm not just talking about the journey to Mount Doom. I'm talking about the journey of self-reflection, of friendship, things like that. He has so many themes in his books, guys, that if you are looking for them, you will find them. They are there. It's amazing. It is very much a human journey. It is very much just discovering yourself. And I say human because, I mean, there's humans in this, but, obviously there's hobbits, there's dwarves, there's elves, obviously. But you know what I mean. It's just like that self-discovery, what makes us tick. It really, in a way where it doesn't get like too like navel-gazing. It's not getting too philosophical here, nothing like that. But it does have a lot of that, about like, well, what are we doing right now? It really has some self-reflection in ways that I think are a lot deeper than people give it credit for. And then I got to talk about the character work, guys, because you know me, I'm a character-first guy. Now, this gets its reputation as just like his incredible universe, his world building. But I got to say what he does with his characters is rather impressive because, no, it's not going to be like a modern fantasy series. You're not going to be like, hey, this guy did this and then that, and this. Now, you could find that stuff in the appendices and in Silmarillion, of course. But in just this main streamlined story here, you may not get it as much as you would in a regular fantasy book now. But what he's able to do, like, for example, in The Hobbit, you have 15 main characters in this traveling party. And you get to know all of them. It's amazing in so many short pages. I'm never like, oh, I don't know who that is. You know who they are. Now you might get like, okay, like Ori, Nori, and Dori. You might get them confused and things like that. But you know what I mean. You can get a sense of a feel for each one of them. Then you come along to Fellowship of the Ring, and you have 9 main characters in this traveling party. And damn it if you don't come to love or love to hate all of them. So it's I never understood like the knock against his character work, because I think that people look at that through a modern fantasy lens where they feel like they know every single thing about a character all the way down to when they came out of the womb, whereas he'll tell you that. You just got to kind of go outside the main story to find those things. So it's there. And if you're one of those people who love something like a Stormlight Archive or a Wheel of Time or even a Malazan for its world building, you can go back like this and you're going to read something like Silmarillion and you're going to just love it. You're just going to eat it up if you want to know all of that backstory. You know, it's all there. So it's Silmarillion. I wouldn't really say it's something I would say, hey, it's a fun read, but it is a very educational read. But I do think that the appendices is very much mandatory reading. If you read The Hobbit and the 3 Lord of the Rings books and you just want more, definitely keep going to read the appendices, guys, because there's so much information there that I don't think people really know about. And it's just so good. It's so good. So it may not be in your straight, just like, a prose narrative form. It is very much more in like almost like a history or a retelling. But I think that you'll find plenty to like there. So definitely check out the appendices if you like what you see and you want to know more. So most fantasy readers under about the age of 30, they were introduced to this world through Peter Jackson's movies, which is great. And then the ones that are even younger than that, they might have actually learned about it during the Hobbit movies when they came out 10 years later. So I know that put a lot of new eyes on this series, but I still encounter so many people like, oh yeah, I love those movies, but I've never actually read the book. So I say you should give these a shot and treat them like the director's cut. That's what I always say about these things. Actually, I would say because those movies, the Hobbit movies, embellished quite a bit. So look at that as like, hey, this is what read the Hobbit and be like, how did they get 3 movies out of this? But the thing with Lord of the Rings trilogy is, I mean, it's just there are changes there, obviously. But read them and see why. Because I'm on the team that like most of the changes except Faramir, I'm pretty much in favor of most of them. So I could be a whole nother video about that because that's always been a debate. I mean, I'm fine with no Tom Bombadil, but you know what? When I read the book, I love those parts. So when I talk about like changes from a movie, I never feel like they're coming and running in my room and taking these books off my shelf. They're always kind of there. I don't think you're going to find. I mean, I would love for any Stephen King story to be followed as faithfully as the Lord of the Rings trilogy was, honestly, on film. So the thing is, like I said, if you got interested in the series because of those movies, you owe it to yourself to read the books, I think, because you'll find that there's a lot there left unsaid on the screen, and you'll learn a lot of new things. And it's definitely worth your time. So the biggest question is, why does this series endure when so many other fantasy series kind of come and go? There's been some big ones, and they come and they're popular for a while, and they kind of fade into obscurity. But yet, Lord of the Rings never does. It always has stayed popular. So what is it about this series that has just stayed so universally beloved? I would have to say, I think it's because Tolkien feels like the foundation, the pillar, if you will, of fantasy. Because every fantasy reader or fantasy author that you guys love, guarantee you at one point they love this story and they grew up with it and it's been very, very influential to them. I even know people who say they don't really care for the books, but they were very instrumental to them, what they created as an author. So it's one of those things, like, I mean, like, I know people who are like, yeah, I don't really like the Beatles. I mean, I think those people are crazy, but I don't really like the Beatles, but I got to respect what they did. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't influenced by some things that they did. So it's definitely one of those that feels like that. It just feels like one of those where parents kind of pass this on to their kids, and kids are just kind of passing on to their kids. I mean, I'm passing on to mine, and I think that's just something you don't get with any other stories. I think maybe Harry Potter might be the closest thing that our generation has to being something that, 85 years from now, we might still be passing down. So yeah, it's crazy to say that a universe that began 85 years ago this year with The Hobbit, guys, that this series is still succeeding off of word of mouth. But it really, really is. It really has just continued to just persevere for those reasons, because it has been very much an important part of their life, and they're passing it on to the next generation. And that's something I think that will never stop. People will continue to pass this down, and they'll continue studying this in schoolrooms for the next 100, 200, or however long we're here. So I think it's one of those things. It's never going to age out. And that's the thing, guys. You can miss me with all that it's aged out talk. I do know that there are a lot of younger booktubers than I that are like, Lord of the Rings, look, I respect it for what it was, but it's kind of aged out. Disagree. I think that's absolute just hogwash, for lack of a better term. Keep this PG, because there might be some people here watching this with their kids. I don't know. I don't know if I got any kid viewers. I doubt it. But anyway, why should you read Tolkien, guys? Because he's the best. I'm sorry, he's the best. That's it. This is my favorite fantasy series of all time, and that will not change until I go to the Grey Havens myself, hopefully. So, guys, that's really all I got to say about Tolkien is he's the best. You should read it. This is a story that has a legacy that it does because it's special. It is incredibly influential. It has aged incredibly well, and it is just a story that is eternal and is still being copied today because of how influential it was. And yeah, leading up to Rings of Power, guys, I'm going to be doing one of these per month. And what I mean by these is a review. So the book for May is going to be The Hobbit. I'm going to be doing a review of The Hobbit. It's just going to be my standard regular review. Basically, feedback is what I need before I decide if I'm going to do spoiler talk stuff on these. Here's the thing, guys. I know that people are like, oh, it's an 85-year-old book. Why do you care if you tell spoilers? I hate spoiling stuff for people. I absolutely can't stand it. So if I did a spoiler review, it would be a separate kind of thing. And I would kind of almost prefer that to be like a discussion, like Philip and I did with Beowulf. You know, I would prefer it to be something like that. But again, it just depends on you guys. I don't know how much interest there's going to be for this on the channel. You know, I mean, I would think this is the most popular fantasy series of all time. But my audience, you know, things kind of flux. You know, you never know. Something that I think that my audience will love, they're kind of lukewarm on, and something I think that I don't know how they'll feel, they absolutely adore. So, you know, I never know. So really, I like to make stuff that the audience likes. So I'm going to do these standard reviews on their own, but anything extra I'm going to do really depends on you guys. So give me some feedback and let me know if that's something that you would be interested in. So if you're going to join me for The Hobbit, I highly recommend this annotated edition because it is just fantastic. It's fine if it's your first read as well and you want to kind of get the full experience because it has the nice annotations about what he was doing, what he was thinking at the time, where he came up with this, some original sketches by Mr. Tolkien and things like that. It's just a really, really cool way to read this charming and thrilling story. And if you got the opportunity, guys, read it with the kids because I think your kids would absolutely adore this. So start them young, you guys. It's the best place to start. So, guys, that was why you should read J.R.R. Tolkien. Again, I think it's a very silly question. I think you should do it because you owe it to yourself. So, have you read Tolkien? Obviously, drop in the comments. Let me know what you think, guys, and I will talk to you there.